Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It feels so nice to finally get back in front of a camera today as my first video back post-baby, and I wanted to sit down today and tell you guys a story because you guys love the story times on this channel, and this is probably going to be the most important story that I tell here. And that is my son's birth story. I had a few requests for this on past pregnancy related videos. A lot of people were like saying that they wanted to hear the birth story. I had people message me on Instagram asking if I was gonna make a video about it, and honestly I was very on the fence at first. And I've decided that I wanted to do it and just tell you all about my experience having my very first baby. If you don't know me, my name is Kaylee. I live with my husband Brandon in Maine. We live in an old farmhouse with our dog and 2 cats, and we now have a little baby boy. And this has obviously been a crazy year. Like, this is such a huge life change. And I just wanted to share the whole experience with you guys today. He was born on December 17th at 39 weeks and 1 day. And it was quite the experience. So a little bit of a disclaimer before we get started with this video. Obviously, this story is about birth, and I'm not gonna necessarily sugarcoat things. So if that's the type of topic, I know like my channel doesn't really focus on that type of thing. If that's the type of topic that you're not comfortable with, you might want to skip this one because I am going to go into somewhat of some detail regarding everything. And the second thing I wanted to throw out there is that this story, while the overall experience I would say was pretty positive, I would not call this a necessarily like completely positive birth story. So just keep that in mind, that there were some things that I was not super thrilled about, that we came out of this and I was kind of sad about. The experience was not sunshine and rainbows from start to finish. There were definitely some hiccups. So that's all stuff that I just wanted to throw out there, that if you're watching this hoping for like a really super duper like overly bubbly positive birth story, it's not this one, because there were definitely things that I'm gonna speak to that we did not anticipate happening. I went into my birth experience with a very open mind. I told my OB from the very beginning that I didn't want to have like a set birth plan. I had preferences, but I was pretty much ready to roll with whatever we had to do to get my son safely into the world. And I have to say, I'm very glad I went that route with my thinking, because had I been really set in how I thought things were gonna go, I would think I would have been even more disappointed because we had some very unexpected moments. So let's get into the story. I have a little journal here. I wrote down actually the whole experience once I got home, because it's so weird. You like start to forget things. So you might see me reference this a few times just to remember like every little detail, but I'm gonna try and pretty much tell this from memory, starting at my 37-week appointment. So I was making videos still at 37 weeks. I think I was going into my 38th week when I made my hospital bag video. So I had just had my 37-week appointment at that point, and I had been told at that appointment that I was already a centimeter dilated and I was 50% effaced. And my OB was very surprised by that progress at 37 weeks, especially with my first baby. She said she didn't see progress that early on normally. So that was at 37 weeks, and then a week later at 38 weeks, I was told I was 2 centimeters dilated, and she didn't give me a percentage for effacement, but she said I was way more effaced than I was at 37 weeks. And so at my 38-week appointment, I was told that I most likely was going to deliver by my due date. I would not need an induction. She, of course, could not guarantee this, but she felt very confident that I would go into spontaneous labor without any intervention. So I left that appointment feeling pretty good and pretty much being like on the edge of my seat, like I could go into labor at any moment. I had been having labor signs from like 35 weeks or 34 weeks. I'd been having what they call lightning crotch, which is like when the baby is pressing on nerves in your pelvis. I'd been having Braxton Hicks contractions for a long time. Even some minor like regular contractions, or so I thought they were, cramping, that type of thing. I was just ready to go. Like at 38 weeks, I was like, this needs to happen now. I am so ready. As fate would have it, we still had another week to go. But the official labor story starts on December 14th when we went out after Brandon got home from work. We went out to Walmart. We walked around, we ran some errands, and I was having a lot of like pelvic pressure. And walking is something that can trigger labor. They tell you to move around. So that's what we did. We went out to Walmart, walked around the store. I was like leaning heavily on the cart, like just feeling like so done. And obviously that didn't kick me into labor, but the next day we decided to do the same thing. So this was on the 15th of December, and we decided to go out to Target and to Lowe's and then pick up dinner on the way home. And we got to Target and we were just running around picking up like odds and ends for Christmas stuff. And I noticed like I was definitely more uncomfortable than usual. Like my pelvis felt really, really heavy. And by the time we got to Lowe's, which was right after, I instantly knew that something was different. I knew right away that labor was probably right around the corner because it felt like my baby's head was literally laying on my pelvic bone. And I could barely walk. I was walking through Lowe's, like waddling like I'd never waddled before. I ended up going in the bathroom and I was sitting in the bathroom just like, oh my God, I think I'm gonna go into labor like anytime. And when I came out, I actually told Brandon that. Like I was like, I think I'm gonna go into labor tonight. So after we left Lowe's, we went and got dinner, we went home and had dinner. I took a shower, hoping like standing in the shower with like gravity would help induce labor. And after that I bounced on my birthing ball and the pelvic pressure kind of had gone away. Either that or I was just used to it by that point. And so I was like, you know, false alarm. I've had a few of those, and we just decided to go to bed. So at about 1:30 in the morning on the 16th, I was jolted out of my sleep by what I knew in that moment was a contraction. The running joke, like I laugh about this now looking back, because I had been telling people for a while that I was so worried that I wasn't gonna know when I was having contractions, because I had been having all this like early labor symptoms for weeks. I had been having the lightning crotch, I'd been having cramping, and I thought, how am I gonna know when it's a contraction? Joke's on me, because at 1:30 in the morning when I got jolted out of my sleep, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that I was having a contraction. I could not believe how painful it was, and it actually freaked me out because, you know, I was picturing my contractions starting out really mild and ramping up over time, and I was laying in bed in agony. Granted, it was still very much early labor at this point, but they were really painful compared to what I was picturing at that stage. So Brandon had actually relocated to the couch to sleep, which he does often. He has restless legs, and so he'll go out and lay on the couch a lot at night. So I was in the room alone, and I just decided I'm just gonna see if I get another one. Sure enough, I got another one. I wasn't timing them yet. I think I waited like for 2 or 3 of them in bed before I decided to get up and go in the bathroom. And this was at like 2 o'clock. So it'd been like half an hour of laying in bed. And then I got into the bathroom and started to time them on my contraction timer app thing that I had. And I could tell that they were anywhere from like 7 to 10 minutes apart. Most of the time they were 10 minutes apart, but they were coming very consistently, which I had not had happen yet. I'd had very sporadic, like minor contractions in the past, but never this consistent. So at about 2:30, I decided to wake up Brandon, and I was still kind of nervous that this wasn't real because you just never know, like it could be false labor. And I was very much hoping it wasn't because I was in a lot of pain. And I thought, if this is false labor, you know, I can't do this forever. I can't do this on and off like until I go into real labor. Like this is really painful. But I woke him up at 2:30. I was like, I think this is it. So we waited like a few minutes. We timed out some more contractions, and they were still pretty consistent, like starting to come even closer now, like 5 to 7 minutes. Like some of them were about 5 minutes, some were a little longer. And so we just decided to pack up like the toiletry bag, what we were calling the go bag. And at this point, I was kind of a little bit in panic mode because I was in a lot of pain. And I was not picturing the pain level to be as high as it was for me at this point. And I also wasn't envisioning my contractions being 5 minutes apart this early on into labor. I don't know, I must have slept through a lot of the early labor, but I don't know, like, before I woke up at 1:30 how long I had been having contractions. They might have just been really, really mild, like all day, and I just didn't know. But yeah, I was really concerned. I was like, wow, these are already 5 minutes apart, like, and I'm in kind of a lot of pain, like this is crazy. And I was just really nervous that they were gonna ramp up out of nowhere and be like 2 to 3 minutes apart, and I was gonna be having a baby on my living room floor. Like, I was just so paranoid because you just don't know. If you've never had a baby, you don't know how fast your labor is gonna go. We're wandering around the house. I'm like half packing things, and then I'd like get distracted by a contraction, and I would leave things like half packed, and I was like forgetting things every 5 seconds. Like, my brain just kept resetting because I was so like just all over the place. And luckily Brandon was like packing things for me, and I eventually like was like, I should probably like get dressed. And my brain was so scattered in that moment. And I was yelling for him to like hit the timer on the contraction app, and he would, you know, he was the one timing them, and then I would kind of judge like their intensity. And a lot of them I would put in like the moderate category, but there were a few that I was having that were really intense. Like, I couldn't really talk through them, and that was what was stopping me in my tracks. Like, whoa, these are ramping up so fast. So we decided at about 3:30, or no, it was like 4 o'clock or so in the morning, to call the nurse's line at the hospital. And it took them about half an hour to call me back, which was really tough. Like, I just wanted them to call so bad so that they could tell me whether I should come in or not. My app was telling me to go in because my contractions were about 4 minutes apart at this point. I finally get a call from the on-call OB, and she was like, at first very like skeptical if I should come in or not. She was like, it's your first baby, I don't know. If you want to like labor at home for a little longer, I think that would be okay. And I was like, listen, we're 45 minutes from the hospital. I just don't know if that's a good idea. I said some of them I can't talk through. And the second I said that, she changed her whole like opinion and said, yeah, maybe you should come in. She was like, if you're having some that are that strong, she was like, I would just come in then. And so they gave us like instructions of where to go, and we left for the hospital at about 5 o'clock in the morning. And the drive-in was fine. I had a few contractions that were pretty strong in the car, but it wasn't as terrible in the car as I had envisioned. A lot of people say contractions in the car are just awful. I was just more like excited and focused on the fact that like this is happening, like we're potentially gonna have the baby like now. It was just more excitement than anything, and then battling through the contractions. The contractions for me felt like very, very stabby, sharp stomach cramps. Super low. I was having some in my back, and then also some in the front, and then some back and front at the same time. It was kind of a toss-up which one you were gonna get, and they were all pretty equally painful. So, but yeah, that was kind of what I was experiencing. And we got to the hospital at 5:45 in the morning, and we went in through emergency because it was so early, and they patched us up to the maternity ward, and that's where we were passed over into triage, and they said, you know, we're gonna check to see how you've progressed, and we'll just kind of assess from there. And at this point, I was really scared that they were gonna tell me I wasn't progressed enough to be admitted. Because again, we were 45 minutes from our house, and I didn't wanna have to like loiter around the hospital and like labor like elsewhere. And then also like driving home I felt like was risky, and so I was just praying that they were gonna admit me. So our nurse, she actually ended up being our discharge nurse after the baby was born, so that was kind of fun. We started with one nurse and we ended with the same nurse. She checked me and she said, oh yeah, you're like a 3-4 centimeter dilated, which obviously was progressed from my 38-week appointment. And fun fact, the day that we went in was supposed to be my 39-week appointment. Like, I was 39 weeks that day, had an appointment that morning at 10:30, And here I was in triage at 6 in the morning in labor. So she was like, okay, I'm gonna get you a bunch of water. I want you to drink a bunch of water, and I want you to walk the halls for an hour, and then we're gonna recheck you and see if you're progressing. I think they give you the water because when you're dehydrated, it can amp your contractions up, and they wanted to make sure I was in like true labor. So she gave me the water, we got me in a gown, and then Brandon and I start walking the hall, which the maternity ward was like a big loop, so we were just doing like the loop. And I was in excruciating pain. My contractions just started to get crazy out of nowhere. I was gripping like the handrail in the hallway, and Brandon was doing counter pressure on my back, which they had showed him how to do. And honestly, the back labor that I had was very easily managed with that counter pressure. But the front contractions I was having, like intermittently, were the ones that I couldn't do anything about. So a lot of people say back labor is like so bad, which I agree, it is. It's so painful. But at least the counter pressure helped those. Whereas when my contractions were all in the front, it was like rendered, like there was nothing anyone could do for me. I just had to fight through it. We did like 4 or 5 laps around the floor, and then I think the nurses could see like how much pain I was in, so they were like, okay, like go rest in your room, it's okay, like we're gonna come in and check you again. They brought me a birth ball as well to like sit on, and I literally could not tolerate like sitting at all. I had to be standing, I had to be moving around. The second I sat down, it was just like contractions would be amped up, which was probably like a good thing for like progression, but I just could not deal. So finally nurse comes back in, she's like, I'm gonna check you again. She checks, and I'm at like a 5, approaching a 6, she said. So she's like, yep, you are progressing, we're gonna admit you. And I was so relieved. Like, I was just like, oh, okay, good. We're here, baby's coming, like we're not gonna have to go home. I could not imagine leaving at that point with how I felt. It would have been terrible. They get us into our room, and I was just kind of laboring in there for a little bit. They asked me what I wanted to do for pain management, and I said I do want an epidural. I told them right then and there I wanted it because I knew it could take a while to like get the anesthesiologist up there. So I'm really glad I told them that when I did, because I was just in so much pain, and I knew I was at like a 6 with dilation, and I was pretty proud of myself for making it to that point without the epidural. The OB came in. She was not my regular OB, who happened to be on vacation the 1 week of the year that I went into labor. But it was a different OB that I had met before, and she was so nice. And she came in and she just talked to me about like getting the epidural, how I was feeling. And she was like, I was supposed to have you for your 39-week appointment at 10:30 today. And I was like, I know, isn't that funny? And here we are. So she was super nice, and I'm really grateful that it was her that was there, because it was an OB that I'd had before for a different appointment when my OB was, I believe, like in a surgery or something. And I was very comfortable with this alternative OB. So she was really just like, we're gonna do what you want to do. She asked me about my birth plan, and I told her like, let's just roll with it and see what happens. She's like, I love that. And we went from there. So that's when they came in. They did my IV, which they missed both of my forearms, both. I ended up with it in my hand, which was not fun. I then got blood work, and then the anesthesiologist came in and gave me my epidural, which I was so nervous about getting the epidural, and I have to say, for me anyway, I did not find it to be very bad at all. The numbing shot, yeah, it stings for like 10 seconds, but what's really difficult is holding your position of being like hunched over on the bed while they're placing it while you're having contractions is like the hardest thing. Like, not being able to move is so difficult. And I was like clawing Brandon's arms, like fighting through contractions. Luckily the anesthesiologist was pretty quick, and he, you know, got everything in on the first shot. And then I started to feel the effects of that epidural, and then we kind of went into the slower part of my labor. So the beginning of my labor was very like intense for me, but once I got that epidural, I was like, this is great. At this point, I was happy as a clam because I was like, I made it through the part of labor I was so nervous about, which was like the pre-medicated labor. And I'm like, we're on the other side of that now. I have the epidural. Like, this is great. They had to turn my epidural down because I was too numb. I was starting to get numb up in my hands, which is not supposed to be happening. And they think it was because of my like size that it was just overpowering. So they did have to turn it down a little bit, but at the time it didn't like affect anything. So I was fine. And then I had the sweetest nurse while I was in labor. She got me like a bunch of Jell-O and Italian ice. I couldn't eat anything at this point. And the last we had eaten was at 6 o'clock the night before we had had dinner. So I was so hungry at this point. That was like the hardest part of this part of labor, which is dumb, but it is. Like, it was the hardest part, was how hungry I was. So I was just like eating Jell-O like it was my job, ice chips, Italian ice, drinking Gatorade, drinking water, and just trying to cope with the fact that I was so hungry. This part of my labor was like pretty slow. They were hoping that I would progress really quickly after I got the epidural because I had been progressing really well before, and they thought, okay, like letting her body relax, she's gonna go right up to a 10 super fast. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. I was at a 6 for the first couple of hours of having my epidural, and that's when the OB came in and said, would you be okay with us breaking your water? And hopefully that will progress you a little bit faster. I said, sure. So they broke my water. I had the epidural, so I didn't really feel like a difference in contractions or anything. And then they left me alone for another couple hours. So it was like basically 2 hours and then they'd come in and check, and then 2 hours and they'd come in and check. And like 4 hours went by and I did not progress at all. So that's when the OB came in and said, you know, how do you feel about us giving you some Pitocin to just amp up your contractions? Because they did not feel my contractions were strong enough at this point to continue to dilate me. They decided to give me like a peanut ball to like put between my legs to hopefully dilate me without using the Pitocin. We tried that first. I had the peanut ball for a few hours. And they checked me again and I was at an 8. But then a couple hours later I was still at an 8. At this point they decided on the Pitocin, which, yeah, I didn't really want it, but at that point I was like, I just want to get the show on the road. So yeah, they administered Pitocin to get my contractions stronger. This was when my epidural started to not work anymore. So on one side it started to wear out, and it would be like if I was laying on my side with the peanut ball in between my knees, I could feel the epidural starting to wear out on like the part of my back that wasn't against the bed, if that makes sense. And I would have like just crazy back spasmy labor. Like that's how it felt, was just like back spasms. And I was just in a lot of pain. And so they would then rotate me onto my other side and it would kind of fix it, but the epidural was just like not strong enough. They kept upping my Pitocin at the same time because again I wasn't progressing. So it was kind of like they were upping the Pitocin, my epidural's wearing off, they don't want to up the epidural because it was too strong for me before, but they have to up the Pitocin, I have to deal with the contractions. So I was getting very frustrated, and this went on like this for hours. I had thought he was going to be born on the 16th of December, and as we were slowly creeping into the evening I was realizing that he probably wasn't gonna be, and it was really discouraging and just upsetting. I was so hungry, like I said, I felt so tired, I was trying to sleep, but the back labor that I could feel was obviously not letting that happen. I also had like a blood pressure cuff on that would go off every like 30 minutes to an hour, and it was so loud it would jolt me out of my sleep. So I was frustrated at this point in my labor. I was hoping to have already been done at this point. So at this point they had the midwives come in. So the OB that I had been working with, she got called into an emergency C-section and was completely unavailable for a while. And they had the midwives who were on the floor come in instead. There were 2 of them, and they decided to do some like stretching with me, shaking of my hips and stuff to get me dilated faster. I was also just like in a lot of pain, so they were trying to help with that. They were really great, though they were definitely, they have just such a different style from the OBs, who are more about intervention, whereas the midwives are more about just like naturally getting me to dilate. So it was nice to have kind of a combo of both, but I was at the point where I just wanted to be done. So yeah, I was kind of agitated and just like really grumpy at this point in labor. So we did all of that, and then I was trying to get some sleep. I remember I was laying there in the dark, and I suddenly just had this overwhelming wave of emotion hit me, and I started to just bawl in the dark. And Brandon kind of woke up and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I'm just in like so much pain. The epidural like not working, in a ton of pain. Everything was just like taking so much longer than I had hoped it would." And I was just really done. I was exhausted. I was so hungry. We ended up calling my nurse, and she calmed me down, brought me off the ledge. I was just having a breakdown. I was telling her, I'm like, it's been almost 24 hours of me being in labor. I thought he was coming on the 16th. It's like midnight. I'm just absolutely beside myself at this point. And she was like, "Okay, I'm gonna check you. We might as well just do a cervical check, like see what's going on." And so she checks me, and she's like, "I think you're at like a 9 approaching a 10. She goes, I really think we're there. Let me go and grab the midwife for a second opinion." So the senior midwife comes in, and she checks me, and we're all like in good spirits here, And she says, no, she's still at an 8. And I'm devastated. I look at my nurse looks at me. I'm not knowing what to say. And my nurse says, "No, I feel very confident that she's progressed beyond an 8. This nurse that I'd been with her my whole labor at this point. She had been consistently doing my cervical checks. Like, she had been the one making the calls as to how dilated I was, and her and the OB had been very much in sync with their opinions the entire time. Cervical checks are very subjective. Like, it's dependent on the person. My nurse that morning had felt I was more dilated than my nurse later on. Like, it really, like, it's subjective. But the midwife was very firm. She was like, "No, she's an 8. She's not a 9. She's not approaching a 10. My nurse was adamant. She's like, "No, listen, I've been checking her all day. She's been at an 8. She goes, "She has progressed beyond that. It's more than that." And they started going back and forth, like, right in front of me. And I'm sitting there just, again, very devastated and just beside myself. Finally, the midwife, like, leaves, and my nurse apologizes, and she's like, "I'm sorry, I really, really am adamant about the fact that you've progressed, and I need to get another opinion." And I was like, "Okay, no worries." And she said, "I'm really sorry, like, I guess this was a teaching moment for me." She's like, "I'm newer on the floor, and I think the midwife just wanted to, like, give her solid opinion there." But you could tell my nurse was really embarrassed, but she was very confident in what she was feeling, which was me being at 9 centimeters approaching 10. Thankfully, the OB gets out of surgery around this time, and she comes back up, and my nurse was able to get her in for a second opinion also. So she comes in, and she agrees with my nurse, and she says, "Yes, she's almost at a 10, and I think there's a little tiny bit of cervix still left, but I think we can start trying to push and maybe get around that bit of cervix, like get it out of there by pushing." And I was like, at this point, yes, like, let's start pushing. I'm good. Even if we're just like approaching a 10, like, let's just do it. So it's just me, Brandon, my nurse, and the OB in the room, and I start pushing. And this was at about probably like 1:30 in the morning. And so it just was kind of like practice pushing to start, but I was really like pushing pretty hard at this point because I was so done with the whole thing. Looking back now in hindsight, I probably should have saved my energy a little bit more, but I was just like ready for this to be over. And the OB soon discovers that baby is under my pelvis, but he's turned sideways. His head is turned sideways. So he wasn't quite sunny side up, but he was turned sideways, which he shouldn't have been. So she informs me of this, and she's like, "I can attempt to turn him." She did try that. It didn't work. At this point, my epidural is rendered completely useless. I can feel literally everything going on. My lower back felt like it was being ripped apart. It was really bad. I was just like shaking. I was in so much pain. And so she then, the OB says to me, you know, we got to get him out from under your pelvis, and I need you to push like as hard as you can. What was happening was his heart rate was going up, and they were starting to realize he was distressed because of the way he was positioned. And so I'm pushing with all of my might, but because I had been in labor for 26 hours at this point, or approaching 26 hours, I had nothing left in my body. I had no energy, having not eaten, having not really slept. I was so tired. And so at this point, the OB suggests that we do a vacuum delivery. And I, without question, agreed. Had you asked me before I had been in labor how I felt about doing a vacuum delivery, I would have been like, like I really just wouldn't want to do that. In that moment, I was like, do what you have to do. So she gets the vacuum, and at this point, a bunch of people come in the room. The room was suddenly full of people. I'm slightly panicking because I know that his heart rate is going up, and it had been perfect all day, so we knew, you know, he was in distress. And so then she kind of like runs me through how the vacuum works. She's like telling me that I have to tell her if I'm not going to push because she's going to release the suction. Like there was all this like technicality. She said basically if this doesn't work, we're probably going to have to do a C-section because of how he's positioned right now. And so I'm bound and determined for this to work because he was so low. She felt like we could do it, and I felt we could do it. And so I said, let's just go. Let's go. And so she places the vacuum, and it took, I think, 2 pushes to get him out from under my pelvis. I felt him come out from under the pelvis, and I was feeling it. I was feeling it at that point. I was screaming pretty loudly, and I'm pretty sure, like, in my head I'm going, you're gonna scare people. Like, people are gonna hear you in the next room and you're gonna scare people. I was, like, scared I was scaring Brandon. I mean, he was right there the whole time. He was holding my leg for most of the labor until this point. But I just kept thinking, like, you're gonna scare people. Like, that was what was going through my head. At this point, she was like, okay, I want you to push like as hard as you can. I did not realize the vacuum was off at this point. Brandon then told me later, like, nope, that was all you. Like, we didn't use the vacuum, like, up and, you know, after he got out from under your pelvis, it was all you. So I'm pushing and pushing, like, with all of my might. I could feel everything. I felt him crowning. Like, I knew when all of that was happening. I was not numb like I had envisioned me being. He had what's called shoulder dystocia. So they knew, like, that I was gonna need a little extra help at this point, and so the OB says, I'm gonna have to cut you a little bit. And again, had you asked me if I wanted an episiotomy before I gave birth, I would have been like, no, we're gonna avoid that at all costs. In that moment, I said, do what you gotta do. So she did a very small episiotomy, very small incision, and right after that, he was delivered. And so there was a lot that happened in this moment. So this was the point that I genuinely, like, the moment was so crazy. So he had the cord around his neck twice, and he was not crying. And they had pre-warned me when they figured out how he was positioned that there might be a problem when he came out. Like, they might have to take him to the warmer right away and work on getting him, you know, up and going rather than putting him on my chest, because the plan had been to do golden hour on my chest, which is when they place him right there and you hold them for the first hour that they're literally just born. And then Brandon was going to cut the cord, like, right there. We had this all planned out. They had warned me that might not happen. So he came out, I could feel, like, a lot, like, I felt his shoulders get delivered, and then there was a lot of, like, fumbling of them trying to get the cord off his neck. I wasn't looking at this point. I'm pretty sure my eyes were either closed or I was looking at Brandon. They put him on my chest for seconds, maybe. And I was in disbelief that I had just birthed a child, which I knew was gonna happen. Like, I made the running joke my whole pregnancy, like, I won't believe he's in there until he's out. And sure enough, like, I just was looking at him like, there was a baby. There was a baby in my body. Like, what? He, like I said, wasn't crying. So they immediately said, Kaylee, we gotta take him. And I said, okay, do what you have to do. And they took him and brought him over to the warmer, and they were working on him over there. And I think he was just in a lot of shock because the vacuum had delivered him very quickly from underneath my pelvis. And I had pushed him out very, very fast after that because of the heart rate situation. Like, they needed to get him out. I think he was just in a lot of shock. Finally, after several minutes of him not crying and me having just pure panicking, I was screaming, crying, asking Brandon over and over, like, why isn't he crying? Why isn't he crying? The OB was trying to calm me down. She's like, you're okay. You're both okay. Like, they're working on him. It's okay. She was trying to calm me down while she was stitching me up. There was a lot happening. Finally, they said, listen, listen, listen. And I could hear him start crying, and the relief of hearing him cry. And then they called Brandon over to cut the cord. So they had cut it long, and they had clamped it, and then they allowed him to go over and cut it really short, you know. So he still got that experience of cutting the cord. And he took some pictures and then came back over to me and was showing me pictures of him in the warmer and stuff. And he was screaming, screaming at this point. But then we realized that he was having trouble regulating his oxygen. And they were definitely, like, concerned about that. The pediatrician was in the room, and the baby nurses, they were all pretty concerned about him. They brought him over, and I got to hold him for about an hour. He was born at 4:01 in the morning, and I held him till almost 5 o'clock. The entire time I held him, he screamed. Red in the face, which you would think was a good thing, but again, they were worried about his oxygen. He was not regulating his breathing, and they were pretty concerned. So they told us that they would be bringing him to the nursery after I had my time with him, and they did take him at about 5 o'clock in the morning to the nursery. From here on out, I have no idea what happened. My brain is blank. I had to ask Brandon what happened, and he was like, well, they cleaned the room. All the nurses were cleaning up the room around us. He goes, you had a snack, which I do remember that I had some Cheez-Its because I could finally eat. The OB, you know, she got me stitched up. She got everything cleaned up. I remember her saying, I'm gonna leave you guys now. And she left. And I don't really remember much else after that. I remember just feeling like utterly exhausted. They left us to kind of relax in the room. Brandon ended up going to get me my food, which was lasagna that I wanted so bad. But I ended up not eating a ton of because I did not feel good after the birth. I was like this sickly yellow color, super pale. I mean, like, just everything depleted in my body. Like, it took my entire hospital stay plus a few days at home to get me back up, like, to my normal skin color because I was so just wiped. That's when the recovery process started, and the baby was in the nursery until 5 o'clock at night. So the first 12 hours of his life, we did not have him in our room with us. Around 10 in the morning after he was born, Brandon went in and got to do skin to skin with him in the nursery, and he came back and he said, you know, I don't think you want to see him the way he is right now, because he needed an oxygen mask. He was hooked up to a bunch of monitors. He had an IV. They were still having trouble getting his oxygen levels regulated and stuff, and it was just Brandon said it was just a very scary sight to see him hooked up to all this stuff and the oxygen mask being put on him and him just freaking out. I ended up going to see him at about 12 o'clock 1 that day, and they handed him to me in the nursery, and I immediately felt him relax and his oxygen levels regulated, and they were like, see, he just needed his mom, and it was just like a really nice moment. And then I ended up pumping him some colostrum. We were with him for like an hour or so, and then we went back to the room and had lunch. And that first day was really just like about us getting like me back to being okay, him being okay, and it was really hard to not like have those first few hours with him, but I am so grateful for the people at this hospital that took him and cared for him and made sure he was okay. And by 5 o'clock that night, he came back to us and we got to have him in the room. He was still hooked up to his monitors. The nurses were coming in quite frequently to check on him. But by the second day, he was off of the oxygen monitor, and by the third day of going home, like, he got his IV taken out, which was nice, and we could, like, hold him without having, like, cords everywhere and being restricted. Yeah, it was just, you know, really good to see him improve like that. So he was 6 pounds, 13 ounces, and 20 inches long when he was born, and when we left the hospital, he was 6 pounds, 7 ounces, so he dropped a little bit, but that's really normal. So he was a little teeny peanut, born at 39 weeks and 1 day, and yeah, so the whole experience in general, I would say, had its ups and downs, and luckily we were able to bring him home as planned on day 3, which felt so crazy after all the stuff that had happened. Like, I was like, wow, we're already going home. It's crazy. From there, we've just been living our little lives together, and I'm a mom. And today, he's a month old. He is 4 weeks old today, which is really crazy to say, and I cannot believe that he's already a month old. It makes me a little emotional. I want to talk briefly about my postpartum stuff, and then I'm going to introduce him to you guys. So postpartum, we talked in other videos about postpartum depression and my emotions throughout my pregnancy. I had baby blues really bad the first 2 weeks of coming home. I was just crying about everything. I was crying over things that I just did not think I was going to care about. I also just had a bunch of new anxiety and fears regarding having a newborn. One of the things that I was most freaked out about was just like something happening to him. Like, I was always worried about keeping him safe, just anybody else handling him, his weight, whether he's eating enough, whether he's safe, you know, just all of those fears, which are very normal to have. And then I would just have like weird moments, things that I would be weirdly sad about, like my pregnancy belly being gone, being so used to having that. And the first night I like went in the shower, and like looked down and I didn't have my belly, I got really sad because it was like, you know, I was bonding with him for 9 months. Like, he was like living in my body, and to have him not in there anymore was just so weird and just kind of sad to me. And I was like, that part is over. The pregnancy part is over. And it made me so emotional, even though I swore up and down, like, I'm like, I won't miss this, you know, I just want him here, I just want him here. I was so happy to have him there, but at the same time I was like, the pregnancy part is over. The birth is over. Like, that has all happened now, and now he's here, but that part that we've anticipated so much is done. And it was just little things like that that would make me sad. And that lasted for a couple weeks, and I was very careful about like watching, you know, myself and making sure it wasn't going beyond that, and telling Brandon like, oh, I feel sad right now, and explaining it and crying, and him just being like, it's okay, because the hospital told us this was gonna happen, and they told him like, you gotta be understanding right now, she's gonna be all over the place with her emotions. And he was so wonderful. The first 2 weeks he was home with me the whole time. He's been a wonderful support partner and dad to our little boy. It's just been like, I could not ask for more from him. He's just been excellent, and just taken on his role of dad as just amazingly, just so well. And we're just having fun with it now. As far as healing goes, like, my healing's been pretty good. I definitely had to kind of experiment of how much can I walk around my house and like overdo it, you know, cleaning or doing my regular everyday tasks around the house, of how much does that affect my healing. And spoiler alert, it does affect it. And when they tell you to rest and lay in bed and just veg out for a couple weeks, they're not lying. And if you don't do that, sometimes your healing can be disrupted. So I had that happen where I had some increased bleeding and stuff, and I had to kind of pull back. And I've really wanted to try and like jump back into my routine, and it's just been a lot slower going than I had hoped, but it's okay. I've had to kind of like give myself some grace and be like, you just had a baby, like, please chill. That was it, you know, it happened. We had a baby. We have a little boy now, and I would love to introduce him to you guys now. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably already seen his picture. I have not been posting a ton of him on social media, just privacy reasons, but I did, you know, feel that I should introduce him here because YouTube is such a big part of my life, and he will be, you know, like I've said, featured here and there in videos. I'm a mom now, he's part of my life, and this channel is about my life, so yeah, I'm gonna introduce him to you now, and here we go. I'm gonna go get him. Oh, are we in your room? Hi. Hey. Okay, he just ate. Brandon was feeding him downstairs, but this is Thomas Edward Lambert, and we call him Teddy as a combination of his first and middle name. Oh, are you pooping? He is named after my late stepdad, Tommy, and Brandon's late uncle, Ed, and so it's very much a family name and very meaningful to us. But because my stepdad's name was Tommy, or we called him Tommy, we didn't want to nickname him Tommy, so we just combined the first two names into Teddy. So, you want to look? Hi, sweetheart. What's that? Do you see the light? He loves looking at windows because they're so bright, and he can really see the brightness at this stage. He's a month old, like I said today, so he's really starting to track faces, and I'm hoping for little smiles soon, like real smiles, not like gas smiles. So, looking at your hand? I couldn't even imagine before, like, loving someone as much as I love him, and just immediately just knowing I would do literally anything for this child. But being a mom has given me like this whole new purpose in life. It just feels really right. It feels like where I need to be. And I could not be happier to have him as a part of our lives now. And I just wanted to just quickly introduce him. Yeah. But that is going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you guys have enjoyed the birth story. Please share your experiences down below. Everyone's story is different. Mine was both positive and negative, and definitely had its ups and downs, but would I do it all over again for him? Absolutely. It was quite an experience. It was one that I won't forget, even though I had to write half of it down. It was an amazing day, and this is what came of it. This is what I got out of it, huh? Yeah. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like my videos, make sure that you give them thumbs ups and you subscribe to my channel for more lifestyle content. I can't wait to get back to content creation, hopefully in the early spring, guys. As of right now, we are pretty busy, but I thank you all so much for sticking around here on the channel, and I can't wait for some cool spring content, some garden content, all that good stuff, back to the house, the housekeeping stuff, and the cleaning and all that good stuff, with a little bit of baby stuff sprinkled in, of course. But thank you all so much, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!